The basic thesis of this book, which is called The First, that's the title, meaning the First Amendment. So it's directed largely at freedom of speech issues as they turn up in the United States. But in fact, there's a huge overlap between the United Kingdom and the United States and many other countries, all dealing with the same problems that are apparently produced by the doctrine of free speech. And this book, at least in the first chapter, asks the question, well, what exactly is the doctrine of free speech? And the answer I give is nothing at all. There's no such thing as free speech, something that I said years ago, but now I can amplify that by saying free speech is not a thing, it's not an ideal, it's not a principle, it's a rhetoric. It's a ragtag bag of sayings and invocations that people employ on particular occasions, some political, some not political. And when that has been employed, when that ragtag bag of rhetoric named free speech has been employed, you then move on to the next situation where a so-called free speech issue has emerged, and you employ another bag of rhetorical tricks. That's it. There's nothing there, or as I put it in this book, again with reference to the First Amendment, there's nothing inside the First Amendment. It's an absolutely empty shell. Now, I'm not going to make that point today, although I have already made it. I just wanted to give you the background for the questions that I do want to discuss with you, which have to do with how talk about freedom of speech and the supposed curtailment of freedom of speech turns up in our colleges and universities. What's going on when free speech is invoked and where accusations fly back and forth between rival parties, each of which says to the other, you are tearing down free speech. And the response is always, no, you are tearing down free speech. I don't know whether any of you have ever been a party to these campus, I can only call them campus follies, but they are all depressingly the same. And I'm going to try to shed some light on them with your help. Back in May, I believe, I think it was in May. No, it was in March. President Donald Trump, you've heard of him, I take it, announced he was going to require colleges and universities to support freedom of speech if they wish to receive federal research funds. You got that? That, of course, is the assumption behind what Trump is saying, that free speech is a cornerstone, a key, a core part of the academic enterprise. Now, many people in the academy, all of whom are always scurrying for cover when anything happens, and especially people who head academic associations or who are academic administrators, a particularly craven breed of people who answer posturing like Trump's with posturing, usually weaker. And that's always what happens. So here's a guy whom I don't know. He's not an old enemy of mine, but maybe when he hears about this, he'll be a new enemy of mine. One can always hope. His name is Terry Hrtel, and I apologize if his mother is in the audience. He's a senior vice president of something called the American Council of Education, both pompous and vague, quite important. And he says, no, on American campuses, free speech is already a core value. So that's the opposition. Trump saying that universities and colleges are not living up to their free speech obligations. Hrtel saying, yes, we are. What I'm saying is that universities and colleges have no free speech obligation, and that it is a mistake to think that they do, because free speech is not the business that universities and colleges are in. And to put it in a almost proverbial nutshell, Free speech is not an academic value. That's the bottom line assertion here. Free speech is not an academic value. And therefore, if that's correct, and of course I haven't proven it or even argued for it to be correct merely by declaring it, but if that turns out to be correct, then it's odd that a president would be claiming to take away university funds because it wasn't supporting something that wasn't part of its mission and enterprise in the first place. And it's odder still that a defender of the university would fall in with the president's assumptions about the inextricable relationship between free speech and what we do in colleges and universities. So why do I say this? Why do I say that free speech is not an academic value? In order to answer that question, I'll have to ask you a question, which is very simple. If we accept that free speech is, at least in the political context, a value and something people usually celebrate and want to safeguard, what exactly is it in a political context? Remember, I earlier said that free speech is nothing in the sense that there's nothing a core or essential inside it. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing to be said about it in the context in which freedom of speech is invoked and given shape by those contexts, as opposed to having a shape of its own before entering any context. I hope that I've been sufficiently obscure by that statement. John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, especially Chapter 2 of that book, is the philosophical underpinning of free speech doctrine in the United States and elsewhere. Mill is devoted to democratic deliberation, to conversation, and what, according to Mill and others, should be the hallmarks of that conversation. What about entry into the conversation in a democratic society? What does free speech doctrine of the political kind tell us about entry? Anybody enters it because it's free speech, not only in the sense that it freely flows, but it's free in that anyone is free to engage in it. Now, of course, if you speak freely in your marriage, sanctions, believe me. 41 years of experience here. Well, actually 61, because I had a wife previously. But we'll forget about that, as I'm sure she has. No one, the state cannot punish you for offering an opinion, even an opinion which the officials of the state disapprove of. What about the way in which voices that enter the conversation are weighted, given consideration? Again, theoretically. Your voice, you know, the chairman of the philosophy department at Yale University, the owner of a large corporation, the proprietor of a corner convenience market, all voices are welcome into the conversation. And then once the voices are in, as many as do in fact get in, what happens? How does all of this, proliferation of speech get sorted out? There's a phrase often used to preside over the process by which we listen to each other and attempt to separate the true from the false. It's called the marketplace of ideas. Have you heard that? Some of you have not. Well, it's the marketplace of ideas. The idea is that in the marketplace of ideas, all voices deserve to be heard. None should be either anointed in advance as holy and without the possibility of refutation, but none should be dismissed in advance and sent away as being unworthy to be heard. So there you have, in a very rough and ready form, the democratic political conception of free speech, its value, and the way it is supposed to work. In the course of the marketplace of ideas working itself up, the truth will emerge. The truth will emerge in the light of conversational day.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below, or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.